I want you to imagine that you made it through oral surgery training up to your 5th year and then decided to become an orthodontist. Today's guest, John Graham, did exactly that. I want you to listen to him over the next hour while he talks about the factors that influenced that decision, how he was able to successfully transition from a really thriving practice in one state to building a brand new one, outside the box thinking in another state, the impact of his location on his growth, what he does to grow his practice, how he jumped on the quote-unquote Airway bandwagon way before anybody else did, and last but not least, how this really scientifically, medically trained individual approaches new technological innovation and adoption in his practice. So, like I always tell you, grab yourself a drink, get on the treadmill, start the car, whatever you're going to do, but this is going to be a great one, so enjoy. Today, I have a remarkable guest, one of my favorite people in the whole world, the only person who has more energy than I do, my good friend, orthodontist extraordinaire, Dr. John Graham. Welcome.
Oh my gosh. Everybody just stop listening now. I'm so, oh man, God. I got so much to live up to. Oh no, I'm here. I'm here, baby.
No doubt. I just want to go back real quickly and tell people how I met you. Do you remember how I met you?
I remember very clearly how you and I were brought together in this world. I remember getting a phone call from you. I'd never met you before. I had never heard of you before, or maybe it was an email. I don't remember that detail, but I do remember you coming to visit my practice when I was in Phoenix because you were told to do so by Dave Paquette, whom you had recently visited in your quest to become an orthodontist after having been a tremendous restorative dentist for those many years.
That story is completely
I remember that right? Did I?
Completely true, except you got one thing wrong. You said I was a tremendous restorative dentist. I would take tremendous out. Other than that, but what most people don't know, and you do, and I have no problem admitting it because I think we need to own our lives. I applied, I think, to 58 orthodontic residencies and got into none my first time through. And
that's correct.
I was 43 years old when I applied, or 42. I'd been practicing at that point for 20 years, give or take, 18, I think. And I applied to 58 schools. I got a few interviews, but never got in. And my wife gave me a pass to apply again. And I said, if I'm going to apply again, I'm going to try my best to meet the people who can tell me the secrets of orthodontics and what I need to do to get in. And I went to go visit Dave on my own nickel and got to watch an ortho practice in person, a good one, as we both know. And he had said, you've got to go see my buddy, John Graham. And so I think a week and a half later, I was in Litchfield Park, right?
Yeah, you didn't mess around. I mean, you came straight out.
It was my life, and I wanted to be an orthodontist. So you do what you got to do. And I remember showing up at your office, not knowing who you were or anything about you, and you welcomed me with open arms, which is a side note to everybody listening. When people ask you if they can come visit, just say yes. Nobody's out to steal your secret sauce. Nobody's going to duplicate what you're doing in your office. They just want to learn. And my doors are always open. I know your doors have always been open. And it's one of the things I love about you. And I remember that day, I saw some great orthodontics and some great practice management. But even more so, I saw us put a fake rat in one of your team members' lockers. You got me to put a fake rat in Maria's, like I'm the stooge. We tied a balloon to the back of somebody who was scared of balloons.
Petrified.
Yeah. And I remember you singing to a patient the words from Britney Spears' Toxic.
Wow. Seriously, you remember that?
Oh my, how would I ever forget that? That was my introduction to orthodontics. I said, look, if you get the chance to put fake rats to scare people and tie balloons and sing Britney Spears, I mean,
yes,
that's a fulfilling career right there. And so
Well, that means that you've got a career where you have a lot of spare time.
Yeah, yeah. But I do remember when that day was over, I looked you in the eye and I said, "This may sound weird, but I feel like I've known you like for 3 decades." And you just have that
It was
quality.
legit.
You just have that quality, John. Anybody who meets you becomes a best friend within 10 minutes because you're just that guy. And that's why I wanted to have you here today because I think a lot of people kind of know you. And I only hope they get to know who you are as well as I do because the person you see on stage is just such a small part of the amazing person that's John Graham. So
Oh, man.
I'm just being
Now I'm
honest.
blushing.
No,
I
I'm being honest.
appreciate that.
You know, you've just taught me so much, both clinically, practice management wise, and you're just a great mentor for me. So thank you. But let's get into this because
Okay.
you're a great orthodontist. I've seen your work. You're a great human being. You're a great dad and husband. Great family. You've successfully moved your practice from one state to another, which is a story we'll get to in just a little bit. But for those people out there who may never have heard of John Graham and don't know anything about you, let's go back to the very, very beginning. After you got out of dental school, you went right into ortho, right?
That would be incorrect.
I know.
No, I did not. I know you know that. I went straight into oral and maxillofacial surgery residency at Parkland Hospital, right across town from where I was at Baylor for dental school. And I started my residency, something that I had wanted to do ever since I started dental school. And I did that for many years. And then there was a change. And I don't know if you want me to briefly touch on the motivations for the change and why I did what I did, or just pass right on by it.
This is all about you, John. Please feel free. They want to hear the story of the only person who took a more circuitous route to ortho than me.
Well, then you can, and you feel free. You can slice and dice this podcast as much as you want. So
nope,
I will.
It's all natural, baby. And
Great.
It's going to include.
Can I say the F word then?
Anything you want. I'm just going to beep it out. But this includes a bouquet of flowers for your wife at the same time.
That is right. Yeah. Well, you know my story.
So please.
Yeah. Well, so I as I was progressing through my residency, I was a very committed resident. I loved medical school very much. I loved the fund of knowledge. I loved the collegiality. It was a very different experience than dental school, by the way. I think most people who go through dental school will agree that many instructors in many dental schools have a giant chip on their shoulder. I don't know where it comes from other than I feel like they think, well, I could have been an MD, but I'm not. So I'm going to be extra mean and hard on my students so that they know how rigorous it is to become a dentist. That's the feeling that I got after having gone through medical school, which was a very different dynamic for me. From day one, I started as a second-year student, but from day one, the attendings treated you like you were in the club. Like, congratulations, you're going to be a physician, and we're all a team. And they treated their students with a lot of respect. And so it was a real stark contrast for me just having left dental school. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I really dove in. And I had my own lab, and I wrote papers, and I was really committed. And maybe overcommitted was part of my problem. I don't know. But I started in my at the end of my fourth year, starting my fifth year of residency at Parkland. I started to just identify the fact that I had a void in my life, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I was married very happily. I had a daughter. I have 4 children now, but she was the first. And so there were a lot of great things going on, but I felt this void. And in an attempt to figure out what it was, I just thought, I'm not working hard enough, despite the fact that I was working as hard as I thought I could possibly work. In fact, Debbie and I flew out to Georgetown and interviewed for a craniofacial surgery fellowship with an incredible surgeon by the name of Jeff Posnick.
Yep.
And that was going to be what I was going to do. I figured, well, this is it. I'm not as dedicated as I could be. I'm not as specialized as I could be. And this was despite even, there was a time when I was a fourth year, there was an ENT resident that dropped out of their program, and I knew them well, and they called me and asked me if I wanted to join the residency class as a third-year ENT resident. And they told me that I had one day to decide. And so I went home and I spoke with Debbie about it, and we just mutually decided that that wasn't really the direction I wanted to go. And so I stuck around. But ultimately, I finally, it was an epiphany. I finally realized that the reason I had a void, the reason I was unhappy was because I'm kind of a homebody. I liked being with my family. I valued free time. I will briefly tell you that there was an incident at my house for Christmas. My parents had flown out. At the time, they lived in New Mexico, and they'd flown out for Christmas. I was on call as a fifth-year resident, and it was Christmas Eve. We were having dinner, and my pager went off, and I grabbed my pager off of my belt and threw it across the room, and it shattered against the wall in the dining room where we were all eating. My dad just looked at me and said, "You've got a problem. You know, you're going to be doing this your whole life. And if you're that upset because you got to go," which I did, of course, I had to go. And I was up all night operating on a woman who was beaten up by her boyfriend on Christmas Eve and shattered her jaw. That was kind of the catalyst for me starting to think, well, maybe I'm just not happy because I really do value my free time and cherish my family. Well, the point of the story is that it brings us back to that bouquet of flowers you alluded to. On Valentine's Day of 2001, I bought a bouquet, not flowers, it was balloons, a bouquet of balloons. And my wife came home from working as a pediatric dentist, and I said, "You need to sit down, Debbie. I'm going to resign from my residency program. I'm not happy at all." And I didn't really at the time, I didn't know exactly for sure what I wanted to do. I had the medical school grades and the reputation, at least within my own program, of not being a slacker. And I could have probably chosen any other residency to apply to. I thought about derm and I thought about radiology, and the funny thing is I kept comparing all of these medical specialties to ortho. Even though I had no real intention of becoming an orthodontist, I thought, well, is that as good as an orthodontist lives? Because they live a pretty sweet life. And then finally, it just dawned on me, why don't I just try to become an orthodontist instead of all this Mickey Mouse stuff I was going through? And that's what I did. And I applied to 51 programs because I had no idea what to expect. I went to Baylor knowing Rolf Barentz a little bit, as he was the program director at Baylor at the time, and he and I casually knew each other a little bit. So I just walked into his office unannounced, and I told him what was going on, and I told him right where I was in my life, and I said, I'm going to resign from my residency program, and I just want to know if you saw an application from me, knowing this story, go across your desk, would you accept me? And he said, don't even bother filling out an application for Baylor because we don't accept quitters.
Ooh.
And that was my reaction exactly. I just was not expecting that at all. It just floored me. And the problem was what that did for me psychologically is it just gave me the impression that this is how every ortho program will react to me. And it was a really painful time for me because I thought, well, no one's going to accept me. So now where do I go? Fortunately, when I did resign from Parkland, one of the attendings who was in charge of the Fort Worth Hospital, John Stella, a great surgeon, and he said, John, I just want you to know, I had breakfast with him the day I was going to go to Ed Ellis's office and offer my resignation. And we sat in a little diner, and he said, John, I just want you to know that if you 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now realize this was a bad idea leaving the program, I just want you to know that I will do whatever I can to make sure you get right back in and pick up where you left off. And that's that thought kind of went back into, with a bright light in front of me. I thought, well, geez, maybe I just got to go back. Well, I decided that I'm going to go for this one time. I'm only going to do this once, which is why I applied to 51 programs. I'm not, if I don't get in this round, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to do it to my wife. I don't think I could have taken it either. I mean, I was really shaken by how Dr. Behrens responded to me. Ironically, many, many years later, Dr. Behrens, found himself in a position where he was asking me to come and speak to his residents in St. Louis. So it kind of went full circle. And I never reminded him of that incident. I never talked about it. I don't think he remembers it all. But anyway, I decided I'm going for it. And I played.
John, I just want to pause there again for a second, because you and I are about the same age. We're around 50. You're around 30. Mm-hmm. At least you look like you're 30.
52 to be exact.
But I think with life comes some lessons. And, I think you just touched on something really important, that if you're newer into the field, if you're new in any industry, even if you've been around a little while, never burn bridges. Don't burn bridges, and don't live in the past. And you could easily have, stood on your ground and said, hey, you know what, you want me to come lecture? Well, I'm a quitter and I'm not coming, but that's not, but all the successful people I know on this planet, every successful person is always looking through their front windshield. They're never looking in the rear view mirror. And and kudos to you.
I think that's right. Well, I think that it wasn't a conscious thing, but I think you're right. The people I know, like you and others that are successful and driven and whatever, just realize that this world is very interconnected. And whether it's ortho or religion or your country, whatever, you're going to need to lean on some people sometime down the road in a time of need, and you need support. It's just really nice to not worry about having people where, like you said, you've burned bridges and they'll have nothing to do with you. And that just I wasn't gonna do that. But long story short, I got into the Eastman Dental Center in Rochester, New York, and Debbie and I moved from Dallas to there, and we had our second kid while we were up there. It was an incredible class that I was a part of. Jet Pascal was in that class with me, somebody that we both know very well, and Chad Meyer and Lance and David and I can't, now I have to say all their names so that I don't leave anybody out. But
and don't forget,
it was a wonderful class.
Stu Frost was a year ahead of you? 2 years?
He was 2 years ahead of me at Eastman. I didn't know him at all then, and didn't know anything about him other than he was beloved in the clinic. I knew that much. The ladies liked him very much. The assistant ladies talked about him very fondly, with little hearts in their eyes. But that's all I really knew about him. But it was an interesting class because Jeff was a prosthodontist. He was from Seoul, South Korea, but she was a periodontist. And so it was interesting that we had sort of found ourselves as professionals sort of starting over again, if you will. And I loved the fact that I wasn't the only guy who felt like maybe I'd made the biggest mistake in my life by deciding to quit and do something else. So it was a great thing. And that's kind of where we lived.
While you were there, I want to get into, more contemporary John Graham, but while you were there, something happened that I haven't forgotten that you told me about, because Dave Paquette always talks about it. And it's the reason to this day that he still never uses anterior bite blocks, right?
I don't use them either, yeah.
But please explain real quickly what happened to you.
Well, I was in treatment. I'd been in braces at that point about a year, and I had those metal anterior bite turbos that were behind my incisors. And I'd had them in for a while. Thought I had grown accustomed to them, but I ended up choking, totally losing my airway on a piece of pizza while all of us were sitting at lunch in our resident room. And Jet Pascal literally saved my life. He got up and did the Heimlich maneuver on me. And the piece of pizza flew out onto the table. And then the funny thing is we all just sat back down and kept eating like, okay, well, move on. But I just decided at that point, I'm not interested in doing this, because I really think that's why I choked. I had been eating up until that point, 36 years or whatever, without incident. And so I just thought that me not having the ability to occlude in my posterior dentition was the culprit. I could have been wrong on that, but I decided at that point I'm never going to do these again. Posterior bite blocks are fine because people are still eating on their molars with theirs, but I didn't want anybody to choke on a hot dog or something like that, and me to feel as though I participated in that. I almost submitted a case report, if you will, to one of the journals. And then I just realized that's a really bad idea. You don't need to actually publish fodder for attorneys should a case like this ever pop up and they refer to your article and say, actually, this has been known, So I didn't do that, but yeah, that's the story. And I'm grateful for Jeff because I'm alive.
Yeah, this story is a great story. But, it's one of those things, like I said, I think Dave to this day will not use anterior bite blocks because of that story, and yourself as well. And so I'm not telling everybody not to use them, but it's sort of interesting when it comes home like that. So, we could talk about Litchfield Park, where we scared people with rats and Britney Spears songs. But for a whole variety of reasons, you chose to move your practice, which is something most people don't do. They don't establish. And I can attest to the fact, having watched your practice, you had a solid practice in Arizona. And if you want to touch upon it real quickly again, describe your life as you were moving your practice from Arizona. You're moving yourself, not your practice, to a new practice. If anybody out there ever complains, I have to work 5 days a week, it's so hard, I'm killing myself, and we have such a tough life, just sit back, everybody, and listen to the story, because you'll feel really, really thankful for your life. So please describe.
Well, we decided to move for, like you said, a variety of reasons, which I won't go into at the moment, but we decided to move to Salt Lake. And I just knew that, listen, there's never going to be a good time. It's like being pregnant. There's never a good time. There's a million reasons why you shouldn't ever get pregnant, a million reasons why you should never do a move like that. And so I just knew, let's just do it. And let's not look back. We did it. I started a practice from scratch in Salt Lake City at the age of 45. I had no patience. My wife is a pediatric dentist. She joined my brother, who's a general dentist. So I did have a very slow stream because she was starting her own practice. So it's not like she had this backlog of patients. But I couldn't afford to pay the mortgage and feed my kids or whatnot because I didn't have any income. So I flew down. I maintained my practice. I flew down to Phoenix 3 weeks a month. One of those 3 weeks would be Monday through Thursday. I just knew that I needed to maintain my Phoenix practice. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I didn't call the practice in Salt Lake Graham Orthodontics, because I didn't want people in Phoenix to Google Graham Orthodontics to find where my practice was or whatnot, and for them to see that I also had a practice in Salt Lake City. I just didn't think that wasn't very good optics. So I changed the name, which has since gone back to Graham Ortho. But I did that 3 week a month commute for 3 years. And because the practice was so small, I couldn't hire anybody in Salt Lake with one, day a month or whatever, it was. So for about the first year and a half, I would fly my entire Phoenix staff up to Salt Lake City, put them in a hotel, take them to a restaurant. The next day we'd work all day, and then I'd drive them all back to the airport and fly them back to Phoenix on a Friday evening, and then I would meet them on Monday again. So I was working 5 days a week, which I wasn't really accustomed to. I know, poor me, first world problem, but it was exhausting, as you can imagine. And it was hard on Debbie because she was essentially, for the all intents and purposes, she was a single mother with 4 kids, with her own practice, because I was just gone so much. And it was not easy. I will tell you that. Was it worth it? Absolutely. It was worth it. But it was not easy. And then finally, when I felt like I'm up and running enough where I can pay the bills, I searched for an orthodontist to buy my practice in Phoenix, and I found a tremendous one. I wanted to be sure he'd take good care of my staff. more than anything, to be honest with you. And to this day, they're the same staff that were there when I left in 2011. So he's done a marvelous job. He's a great orthodontist by the name of Chris Olson. So shout out to Chris, because he's an extraordinary individual. But it was hard. But, anything worth doing is going to be hard. And I just thought, well, I'm just going to forge through and make this happen. And it ended up working really well.
And the best part about the story, and I don't know about you, John, but for me, we have a lot of similarities in our stories.
Yeah.
And I often look back at sort of the struggle, and it was kind of fun. I mean, it wasn't fun when we we're going through it, but I'm a big fan, as you are, of biting off as much as we can possibly chew. Right? Not to the point where you choke, which you physically did, but I think there's a valuable lesson in terms of saying, hey, if you can dream it, you can do it. It's not going to be easy, but just put your mind to it. And for anybody out there listening right now who's like, I was thinking about doing this, or I was thinking about moving, or, I'm thinking about starting a new practice. I don't think you just flippantly go into it and say, well, hey, let's just see what happens. And Glenn and John said, go do it. But I think if you really know what you want, nothing can stop you. I mean, nothing.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and
in fact, I was told, listen, it's suicide for you to do this, because Salt Lake is just absolutely famous for the competitive nature of dentistry and orthodontics. A person that I knew a long time ago said there's only 3 places in the country that I would not go practice orthodontics: the Eastern Seaboard, the Western Seaboard, and Salt Lake City, Utah.
Wow.
So I was a little bit intimidated and thinking, nobody knows me here. Nobody has any idea who I am, what I do. I was starting just like any new graduating resident would have started. It was very nerve-wracking in the beginning, but I started a very meager, I tried not to borrow too much money. I didn't have a flashy place. In fact, it was my brother's old office. And I just kind of looked at that as this is a tent. And this tent is going to get me by. A comfortable tent is going to get me by until I can move into my final destination, my final dream place. And it served me very well. And I didn't get into much debt doing that because it wasn't very expensive. And then I ended up, moving into a new office. But you're right. Don't be stupid about it. But if you really want to do something, just do it. You just go for it.
Exactly.
You're going to get there, right? You'll make mistakes along the way, but I mean, if you making mistakes and getting the goal and your dream is far better than avoiding mistakes and being stuck somewhere where you're miserable for the rest of your life.
Agree. And so now you end up moving to your new location, which I've been to, and I'll make sure I put a picture of it up for this podcast so people can kind of see what it looks like. But you decided you were going to build a completely different style of office, right?
Right. Yeah, completely. In fact, first of all, I wanted to do everything opposite I had seen every other orthodontist, myself included, do when building a building. I just thought that, listen, this is a great opportunity for me, and I could really screw it up. I don't want this to look like a dental office. I don't want this to look like a medical office. I want people to sort of be confused when they walk in and thinking that maybe they went to the wrong place. And so I decided to do the opposite of every instinct I had, sort of the George Costanza philosophy of life. That if every instinct I have is wrong, then the opposite must be right. So I did that. And I also wanted to build a landmark building. I wanted people to be able to use my building as directions when they're telling somebody how to get to wherever, turn left at Graham Orthodontics. I didn't, not from an ego perspective, I just wanted it to be remarkable enough that people would remember the building as a part of a marketing strategy. And it's paid off very well for me. And so I found a corner that was off limits for 4 years because of a zoning issue. And I identified somebody that I knew had a proven track record of navigating through zoning issues. In fact, he played basketball with 5 of the city councilmen on the Salt Lake City Council. So I was introduced to the dark side of politics, and knowing that it has nothing to do with right, wrong, or the other. It's who you know. And it ended up working really great for me because it's an amazing corner. next to one of the most famous places in Salt Lake, which is called Liberty Park. And so it was an easy place for us to tell people. And I'm up on the second floor. There's a main floor and there's a basement underneath the main floor. All levels have been finished out. I have a med spa that has leased the building from us below us, and they're extraordinary. They're very successful at multiple locations and tremendous marketers. In fact, I'll throw a shout out for anybody that wants to know how to run a successful Instagram campaign. You just look for in Instagram, search Spa Trouvé, Trouve with the thing over the E. They taught me a lot. I have slacked on my Instagram game. I'm getting back into it, but they're amazing marketers, and that's my demographic walking in every day, 18 to 45-year-old females that are walking into their spa for Botox and collagen and all that. And it actually has become kind of a landmark. I at least want to think. I had a friend who was staying at a hotel in downtown Salt Lake, and he was asking somebody about getting an Uber to my office and wondering how far away it was. And they said, where are you going? And he said, I'm a friend of mine, John Graham. He's an orthodontist. And they said, oh, Graham Orthodontics. We know that building. You're not far.
Funny.
You're just a few minutes away. So anyway,
but a
it worked
question
out
for you,
really well.
John. Having built an office, having built a beautiful office at this point, in retrospect, or actually, no, not in retrospect, looking at it now, does being on a main street really help you tremendously? Or is that just a function that you're very active in the community and people can find you easier? Is it worth the money?
I would love to say that it was a function of me hitting the streets and being a really involved community individual, which I try to be. But no, it has everything to do with location, and it is not a meaningless phrase when you say location, location, location. I did a traffic study on the place where I was prior, and I paid the city to study the traffic from 8 o'clock to 5 p.m. How many cars went by? It was around 1,300 cars went by on the street corner that I was on previously. I had them do the same thing before I even bought the plot for the current place I'm in. And from 8 to 5, they estimated about 64,000 vehicles a day go by.
Wow!
It's 6 lanes and 4 lanes that are coming together at this intersection, and 60%, maybe just a little north of 60% of all of our patients, when asking them where they found out about us, say signage, building signage. They've driven by it so many times. So I can attest to the fact that if you have a prominent sign in a highly trafficked location, unless you're a felon, you're going to do really, really well.
And the other thing you did that's worth mentioning real quickly is you didn't just find a piece of land and buy it. You mentioned you worked in partnership with another person. That person happened to be a developer, right?
That's correct.
Which is a really interesting way of looking at it and a great way to consider if you can find this kind of partnership.
Oh, I agree. And that wasn't my initial intention. I knew who this guy was because he had, I live in a part of Salt Lake that is a historic district, right? So as you can imagine, the regulations are very steep and very difficult if you want to do any kind of an addition or change to your home. Well, I saw this guy's company, North Star Builders, on every single remodel happening in our neighborhood. Some of them were complete teardowns, and I just thought, I don't know how this guy does it. So I actually called him and said, do you freelance your zoning capabilities if I pay you? He says, I do. For $5,000, I will work on getting your zoning taken care of, and that he offered some sort of a refund, not total, if it didn't go through. He called me one day and said, "Would you be interested in partnering on that?" And I initially said no. I want to do this all myself. And then I thought about it a little more. It was wonderful because the way that we struck an agreement, I mean, I don't think I could have afforded the building that I'm in right now had I not partnered up with the builder. And I didn't have I had a friend who is a designer that helped me with some of the internal aspects of the building, but basically he and I, the developer and I, the builder and I, sketched out the plans and talked about what we wanted and the how high and all this kind of stuff. And it worked out great. I don't know if I could have done it, Glenn, in all honesty, with the type of building that I have. It would have been too expensive for me. I couldn't have afforded it. And listen,
not only
it is now tripled.
But not only that, he helped get through. he knew the zone. He had a vested interest in getting the zoning through.
Well, that was the reason that it dawned on me. That's when I revisited it in my mind. When I initially said no, and then I started thinking, listen, if he is the builder of the building and a partner, first of all, I know he'll be Johnny on the spot if something is happening in the building that I need to have fixed, because he owns part of he's a half owner in the building. But, second of all, yes, he had a vested interest in making sure that this got passed through the planning commission and the city council. And it was not an easy battle. It was uphill all the way. And there were a couple of times when I thought we're not going to get it. And it ended up that worked out really well. And
That's
so
awesome.
it for many, many reasons, if you can find yourself a partner like that, it is worth teaming up.
Oh, yeah. And it's a gorgeous space, and I just love that you thought outside the box in that one. And by the way, when you talked about attracting new patients, you do something very special with every one of your new patients. You send them something, right? After every new patient
Yeah, I
exam?
do.
What do
I
you
surely
send them?
do.
A new car?
I send them every new patient that starts about a week after they've started. I send them a Magic Bullet blender. You know what that is, right?
Yeah.
And it's small, but you blend it and then you flip it over, and that's you can drink right out of it and take it in the car with you or whatever. It's not cheap. It's about between $35 and $50 depending on when the season and all that. But I'm telling you something. It's meaningful to people because it is something they actually use. It's not a logoed hat and a T-shirt and a keychain with Graham Orthodontics on it, whatever. It's something that they use all the time, and it's unique enough where I just knew people would look at it. And, they're at home with friends, they're mixing a drink or a margarita or whatever they're doing, and think, and they would want to say possibly, guess where I got this? My orthodontist actually gave it to me because he knew my teeth were going to hurt after he started ortho. I've had so many patients that are, so grateful because they really felt like they get it basically right when it hurts the most. They get it about 4 days after they've been bonded up, and so they really appreciate it.
And so it's been a worthwhile thing to do.
Oh, so worthwhile. I bounced it off a few friends of mine before I did it, and they're like, "You're crazy. $50 on every case, basically. If you do the math, it's not going to be cheap at all." And that's correct. It's not, but it is the value and not the price that was driving me to do that.
It's really amazing. So I've been in your practice. I know what a great practice it is. And I know one of the things that's one of your passions for a while, before it became cachet, is Airway and sleep disordered breathing, right?
Correct.
And, Rebecca Bacow was just on the last podcast, and she's been a huge influence on me for Airway and sleep disordered breathing, and you have as well. Talk just for a minute or so, just about, what got you involved in it. And for those people out there who are not involved in it, what kind of impact has it had in your life, in your practice?
Yeah, I think it was born out of an interest, but long before Airway was a hot topic, long before that. Dwight Damon had talked about Airway as sort of a side remark in many of his lectures. And Dwight and I were good friends, and we talked about it. In fact, he'd paid a lot of money. This was pre-CBCT in the office days. He'd paid a lot of his own money to have people go to a hospital and have CT scans because he just really felt that we have got to be making an impact that's positive on the airway, but nobody's talked about it. Nobody's researched it as far as what can orthodontists do. So it was kind of a seed in the back of my mind. And then I got my first ICAT in 2006, I think. And I just started really realizing that, especially interfacing with ENTs, that uniquely orthodontists have the capacity to alter the physical column of air that people struggle with when they're sleeping at night. And pediatricians can't do this. ENTs cannot do this. Oral surgeons cannot do this. You can do it after the fact surgically, but nobody had the ability to actually, reshape an individual's airway. It really kind of went in line with my philosophy of not extracting teeth. I do every once in a while, But the more I thought about it, I just knew mathematically, if we're pulling teeth and closing spaces, we're reducing the the intraoral volume of somebody's mouth, but we're not changing the shape of their tongue. That cannot be a good thing. And I really do feel, and I say this often, that more than any specialty in medicine or dentistry, we have contributed potentially, in my opinion, to obstructive airway disease in people, because we are making things smaller in their breathing hole. And so it really sparked my interest. And so I really dove in both in the medical literature and the dental literature. And I was just soaked up everything that I could possibly learn. I ended up lecturing at the American Academy of Dental Sleep Medicine in Denver a few years back, just talking about child airway problems. There's just a real void in especially pediatric airway. The meeting that I was lecturing at, there were only, out of the entire 2.5-day symposium, there were only 2 lectures that were about pediatric airway, obstructive airway disease, and neither of those lectures had anything to do with how to treat somebody. It was only how to identify. And I just thought, well, the by and large, the biggest majority of potential airway problems are kids. And they're getting inappropriately diagnosed with ADHD and all of these things, not all of them, but some of them for sure. And so I think that because I had an MD and I'm still a licensed physician, and I try to stay up as much as I possibly can on current trends in medicine, I really started communicating and developing a tight bond with an ear, nose, and throat doctor that was from my hometown. And so the changes that we have seen in people that we work on together that are really, really have severe obstructive airway disease by putting in an expander or in conjunction with an adenotonsillectomy, the results have really been remarkable. And more than anything, I just finally feel like everything is really nice in ortho. It's great. It's great to make people smile better and maybe help their TMJ if they got pain or whatever. But this is totally different. I mean, this is potentially helping kids not get pigeonholed incorrectly into something that could affect them the rest of their lives, feeling that they've got a learning disorder or ADHD. And some of them obviously do, but there are some that don't. And if we can contribute in identifying and then correcting that, I think that is one of the greatest things we could possibly do. It disheartens me a little bit. I saw an interview with Rolf Behrens, not picking on him, but I saw an interview with him, and he sort of seemingly kind of addressed airway and orthodontics as sort of the new thing du jour. Once it was TADS and now it's airway, and I just really I beg to differ completely, because this isn't a whim. I'm grateful that people are more aware, and the more people that have CT scanners in their offices, I think that's a natural progression, because you can start to measure in a meaningful way airways, and so you want to fix them if they're really, really tight. It is something that parents know is different about you. It's a differentiator, and I would tell anybody that, not as a gimmick, be really serious about it. Read everything you possibly can in medical and dental literature. The problem is that we're so siloed that they don't read our literature, physicians. We don't read their literature. And very few have seen the connection. But there is an absolute connection. And I think more than anybody, we can impact it. And so I'm grateful to you, because it's become a real passion for you. And you've been very good about communicating that to your patients. And I know, because I know you, and I've talked with you about it, parents recognize that is meaningful and legitimate and differentiating.
Yeah. And the sad part about it, though, John, and it's not really sad for folks like you and I who really appreciate it a ton, but the sad part is, because you actually will make a better living in your practice when you do it, people misunderstand it and think it's a revenue stream. And that's why we do it.
Right.
And you will
That's
have
correct.
a stronger practice. You will have more referrals from sources you never would have gotten them. You will have moms telling their nieces and nephews, when you go through the questionnaire, they will say, that's not my child, but man, that sounds like my nephew. I've got to get him in here, right? And now we've sort of transcended the concept of crooked teeth, and we're talking about health. And if it didn't make money, it would have more legitimacy. But because it makes money, right, and because your practice will be stronger, people suddenly look at it and say, well, he or she is doing it for money. And I'm sure there are some
Yeah.
out there who do. But when you have moms and dads who are at the end of their rope because their child is wetting the bed at age 12 or 13,
Yep.
And the doctor simply said, well, just don't let them drink after 7 o'clock at night. And you look at them and go, I think I might have an answer for you here. Let's try this relatively non-invasive, simple way of addressing things. And when, by the way, go see my ENT, that just raises the bar a little bit more about how we change people's lives. And so I'm very thankful to you for what you've done to help me. And as you know, this year's Orthopreneur Summit is 50% business. I don't want to forget business. I want practice tips and pearls. And we got great people, consultants and Bent Erickson and all these great companies. But 50% is Airway from folks at Stanford, Stanley Liu and Audrey Yoon and Juan Moon is going to be there, Mariana Evans, Rebecca Bacow. We've got some real heavy hitters who are going to, open the eyes to people. So hopefully that'll be a lot of fun. And I know you were at last year's summit, and I appreciate your contribution there. I'd like you to tell people from your perspective what you thought of the meeting.
Well, first of all, just going back to your Stanford connection that you were talking about, and I'm glad that you're grasping the the contributions that Stanford makes with both hands. Steve Shandell, who was the chairman of plastic and reconstructive surgery for so many years, he went to Parkland. He was an oral and maxillofacial surgery resident, and then he went back to medical school and became a plastic surgeon. But Steve took a very early interest in three-dimensional radiography in dentistry, orthodontics, and whatnot. And he was one of the first that gave us normative data based on thousands, over 3,000 patients of all ages that we can use as far as airway caliber in growing individuals and adults. And so the contributions from Stanford when it comes to obstructive sleep apnea are really significant. So I'm really glad that you're doing that. And it's going to be a meaningful meeting completely. And as far as my experience last year, it was ridiculous. I mean, I know you and I know you're ridiculous, but I had no idea that, boy, you would make a meeting, first time you'd ever done such a thing, but to the level of ridiculousness that you did was extraordinary. And I mean the ridiculousness in the absolute best sense possible.
If there's any person I love who can say the word ridiculous as a great compliment, I know it's you, Ken.
to say the meeting was over the top is silly, because it was way over the top in a very good way. I mean, it was amazing, great. Yeah, of course. And you brought things to a meeting that have never been done before. And I'm not going to give away any secrets, but it's awesome because it keeps every person that was there, every practitioner that was there was 100% engaged the whole time. Because hell, they didn't know if a marching band was going to show up, in the middle of their lecture. I mean, seriously, it's that ridiculous in a great way.
It was a lot of fun.
I highly encourage everybody to go to this year's Orthopreneurs. It's different than any other meeting you've ever been to.
Well,
the people are awesome. Yeah, absolutely, and I mean that. I do.
I know you do, and I appreciate it. And I want to, before we go, and you've been practicing as of this interview. How long have you been practicing for now?
We're going on 15 years now. 15.
Okay. So you've been there for a lot of things that have happened, right? I'm newer to the orthodontic world. I'm not there for a lot of the histories of a lot of things that have happened along the way with technologies, et cetera, et cetera. But tell me, how do you decide when to jump on a technological advance, right? Because there's a lot of emotion out there today about, you see it, I see it. There's a lot of discussion about people who say, oh, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. That hasn't been proven yet. How do you decide when you feel like it's time for us to jump on to new technology like a CBCT or any of those sorts of things?
Right. Listen, I can only speak for myself. I don't decide when we as a specialty, but that's what you're asking, is me and myself. If it's intriguing to me and if it is fun for me to do it, then I do it. Sometimes they're not as integratable as other things are into a practice, and I've had plenty of those. But listen, what fuels me and what keeps me passionate about my profession is that there are always things that are on the horizon that actually can help us as practitioners, whether it is to be more productive from a business standpoint or from a patient standpoint. There is the only way to know whether or not new technologies on the event horizon are going to be meaningful is by practical application and trying it. I mean, you can't trust what anybody says. And in fact, there are some professional naysayers, some professional contrarians in the orthodontic world that have made their name by poo-pooing anything that has to do with orthodontists trying something new or making money or whatever. And you can't let those voices stifle you and prevent you from following something that excites you and makes you enthusiastic. Because frankly, that results and translates in better treatment and a better work environment all the way around for your patients, for your staff, because you're happy and you're always learning and you're trying new things. You're testing them. Some work, some don't. And as long as you don't do something stupid that would cause you to lose, your house or your children's education fund, as long as you're not being completely idiotic about new technologies, hell, I say go for it, because that is the only way that we get better as a specialty. I mean, if you guys knew the history of the guy that started endoscopic surgery, you would never in a million years, even for 1 minute, hesitate trying new procedures. I mean, that guy not only was told that he was crazy, they took away his medical license and they prescribed psychiatric treatment for this guy because they thought he was certifiably a lunatic, thinking that he can do surgery without opening up the human body. Well, I mean, look where we are now. And wow. I mean, that led to robot surgery and all this kind of stuff. So if you listen to those that are just either because just frankly, they're uninterested in overcoming the inertia necessary to do something new, and they want to justify it by telling everybody else why it's a bad idea, then you're going to be so bored out of your mind, and you're going to be 200 yards back in the race. And listen,
but a question for you there, because you and I are cut from the same cloth. I always tell people, if you ever want to feel like, I view orthodontics, rightfully or wrongfully, as a bit of a super tanker, right? I mean, nothing happens very quickly. Things take their time. It's short of actually placing an appliance at that moment in someone's mouth. It's really hard to do real damage to somebody with orthodontics. And if you want to feel pressure, if you want to see how slowly and how reversible things are in orthodontics, I tell people, go back to my former life where I had a 30-year-old girl in the chair who didn't take care of her teeth. I've got a anesthesiologist in the corner of my office with a complete anesthetic setup with the girl intubated while I prep 24, 25 teeth and get 3 implants ready. And she's been under now for 3 or 4 hours. And I've got a provisional that I can't get a path of draw on, right?
That makes me want to jump off of a building, Glenn, just hearing you say that.
But I loved it because I'd figure out a solution. You slow down, you think about it, and you solve it. You had people's jaws in your hand, completely detached from the rest of their face.
Right.
Do you think that somehow, I don't think it makes us too cavalier, but I think it gives us a perspective that, so fine, I want to use a totally different type of class 2 corrector. I want to use this completely different type of aligner system. Or I want to try to play around with this thing, because if I do it and it doesn't work, what harm have I caused the patient? Whereas the potential benefit might be huge.
That's correct. And Glenn, there are 2 sources of pressure from orthodontists not feeling like they ought to try something new. One is from the aforementioned naysayers. The other one is from probably well-intentioned dentists, orthodontists, who feel like everything needs to be evidence-based. And that's because they've been brainwashed by education systems in the United States that they feel like I'm a legitimate doctor because everything I do is evidence-based, which is poppycock. That's malarkey, especially in orthodontics. And if you think I'm just talking about that as far as dentistry goes, I will tell you that it still, having my head in the medicine arena, I can tell you that there are plenty of very wise physicians who have realized that we have taken evidence-based medicine far too far. And there's a great article that I will be happy to let you have a link to or whatnot. But there was a publication in the Lancet, a very highly respected medical journal like the New England Journal of Medicine, and it was written by a chairman of obstetrics and gynecology, and it was just talking about the absurdity of feeling like everything has to be evidence-based. And so the way that he did that was to make an absurd article that actually got through the peer review process and published as an article. And it was essentially, look, we have never done evidence-based studies on the validity of parachutes helping anybody as they jump out of an airplane. So what I'm going to suggest to you in this evidence-based world is that we need to set up a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study, and we'll have people jump out of airplanes with parachutes, and then we'll have a group that don't. And then he proceeded to mention names, and he said, and I have a short list of people that are so religious about evidence-based medicine, and he named these people. I didn't know who they were. They ought to be very fine with participating in this study because it will be evidence-based. Finally, that we have something in the literature that says that, you know, the gravitational forces overcome by parachutes is actually now proven. I mean, it was just, it was illustrating the absurd with the absurd, which is a great way of teaching. And so that's the pressure that people get. I'm not going to get into a long thing about evidence-based medicine. Yes, there is a place for it. There is some place for it in some of orthodontics, but mostly when people scream evidence-based medicine, it's because they're trying to be a part of a club that feels that they are intellectually superior to everybody else. And it's ridiculous, makes no sense. And in fact, so many things good doctors end up not trying because there hasn't been any evidence for it being valid, despite the fact that they've got lots of friends and thousands of cases that they know about that have been wonderfully helped by whatever X procedure or appliance. They're doing themselves no service. Them and gynecology. If you put those two words into Google, you will find a story of the doctor that invented and discovered endoscopic surgery and what happened to him. And thank the Lord that they didn't, stifle that absolutely revolutionary way to treat people in a more humane way, faster recovery times, fewer infections. If they had listened to everybody else saying, oh, no, it's got to be evidence-based and that's crazy, well, you saw what happened to him. He lost his medical license and he had to go to state-mandated psychiatry because they thought he was a lunatic. So, and off of my soapbox now.
No, it's all good. And I asked you because, you and other unnamed people who I respect the heck out of, people who are very bright, scientifically trained individuals, people that you and I are friends with. And I won't bring their name into this conversation because I don't want them to be felt like they're being thrown into it. But they do beautiful outcomes. They embrace technological advances as early adopters. Some even invent them. But they recognize the fact that in orthodontics, we all know what the end goal is. If I invented something tomorrow that you'd never seen before, and I said, look, this will help you get to a class 1 cuspid, class 1 molar. It won't restrict the airway. It will allow a mutually protected occlusion with proper overjet and proper overbite, and it will work in harmony with the face, right? At some point, you'd say, if those are end goals and I'm willing to try it, it's going to take a whole heck of a lot for me to get off course here. And have there been mistakes along the way? Absolutely. But I was just talking to somebody last night about the Myaw technique by Dr. Sato and Dr. Kim, who brought it to the U.S. I was trained in the Myaw technique. But again, if you were going to run it through significant scientific review in a peer review literature, and I'm not aware of any really strong studies on any particular wire bending technique, we would never use it. And for some people, it's been a godsend. So again, I jumped on your soapbox for a second, and I apologize. I hope there was room.
No, that's great. It's lonely up here.
I'm glad you're up there for all of us. But I've seen you embrace incredible technology. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. But I think we owe it to to not be swayed away from the conversations that could potentially shorten treatment times. And as long as we don't promise something that we can't achieve, that's fine. But our patients don't care about the second soapbox, which is the key opinion leaders, right? That's the other one that you and I could talk about for days.
Right.
But I will speak on your behalf, not mine, because people don't realize the lonely life you've led, being on the road more days than any of us would like to be. You're a home guy. You want to be home with your family. You've already said it. And you're on the road so much, showing people wisdom and techniques to help them have better practices. And you could make so much more money and have such a much easier life if you weren't associated with any company. True or untrue?
That's true. That's very true.
And the people that they see on stages who are quote unquote key opinion leaders, they don't realize that the overwhelming majority, if not all of them, would do far better not being on that stage, but they do it because they believe in something. I have not yet met a key opinion leader who did not believe in a product that they were presenting. And if they did, they ultimately switched companies. So,
and I agree with that. I have not met anybody that would fall into that category either. I just haven't. I have not met a disingenuous key opinion leader in orthodontics yet, where I could see right through their patina of lectureship and knowledge and know that the only reason they're doing this is they want to make more money, because you don't. And I know a lot of people that speak, and they're all extraordinarily good people that enjoy teaching. And to cry foul because they lecture on behalf of a corp company is ridiculous on the face of it, because nothing in medicine or dentistry would progress out of the dark ages without partnerships with manufacturing companies. It's just, I don't know if it comes from a place of sour grapes, wishing they were doing it. I don't know what it comes from, but it's not honest. But because the reality is we know different.
I would tell you, I would wish everybody to become a key opinion leader for 1 year. And I would say the greatest thing I've ever gotten out of my interactions with a company, aside from the ability to see products and early on and play a role in the development of a product, my favorite part is hanging out with people like you and the other key opinion leaders. Because my practice,
that's the best part of it.
So much when you get together with these people who are really forward-thinking folks and you problem solve together, because we all face the same issues. And I really, I would encourage, I would actually tell anybody listening to this, if you ever have the opportunity to be a key opinion leader, even if you can do it for a short period of time and interact with a company, it really opens your eyes to the other side of the curtain and the amount of time and energy that most companies put into products before they launch them. And they just don't come willingly.
Oh, no doubt.
But you and I could talk about this for days.
That's correct. And we won't.
We've taken up enough of their time. But before you go, I would like to ask you the same 10 questions that I ask every single person on my podcast. And they're the same 10 questions. Did you ever watch Inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton?
Of course I did.
Do you remember his 10 questions at the end? Well, you're about to get them.
Okay, here we go. You got your little 3x5 cards?
Because I'm all analog. I made sure I transcribed everything on the paper before I did. But you're right. He had his little 3x5 card, and he would ask these 10 questions that he borrowed from Bernard Pivot's other interview show. So here you go. No judgment.
Okay.
I cannot wait to hear this from you. You ready?
Oh boy,
Number one,
ready.
What is your favorite word?
Fuck. No, you're going to have to cut that out. I'm sorry.
It's staying because it's staying because
my alternate favorite word, should your conscience serve you right and have you bleep that word out. My other favorite word would be authentic.
Authentic. I like that. But you've just answered question number 5. So we're going to leave it in when we get there.
Okay.
By the way, you would not be the first person to have that as a word in this podcast. I think.
Oh, it's power. It's a powerful word.
I think Chase Frost. I think Chase Frost, who was on episode 2, I think that was his favorite word. But let's go to your least favorite word.
My least favorite word is probably lemming.
Lemming.
And lemming. I have a real problem with lemmings in orthodontics, with lemmings in the United States of America. And you and I both know what the association is with lemmings. And
I'm not letting you get back on the soapbox. You're answering
they serve
no purpose.
Okay. They serve no purpose. They serve no purpose.
Here we go. What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Probably reading.
Wow.
Books.
What turns you off?
Haters.
Fair enough. Now we're going to go back to question number 1 in question number 5.
Okay.
What is your favorite curse word, John?
My favorite what? Oh, no, I'm not going to repeat it. Not going to repeat it.
Said number 1 was appropriate for number 5. You just thought ahead.
Okay.
You're an early adopter.
Yes, I am.
So here you go. Number 6. What sound or noise do you love?
What sound or noise do I love? At the risk of sounding completely corny, the sound of my youngest daughter laughing.
I love it.
She's 9. She's not like an infant, but that brings me a lot of joy.
Beautiful. What sound or noise do you hate?
A high-speed handpiece.
Well said. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Commercial airline pilot.
Nice. What profession would you not like to do?
Politician.
Yeah. And the last one, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Have you seen Glenn?
That's the worst answer ever, because that means I died before you. I don't want to die. Like if it's like, hey, have you seen Glenn? He's due up here in like 10 years. That's like a good one. Just tell him to get ready. If it's like, hey, you're up here already like 5 minutes. Have you seen Glenn? Like,
have you seen Glenn around?
Okay, we'll go with that one. But I always love my time with you. I pity any human being who ever sits down for a beer or a soda next to you and me in the midst of a conversation, because their head it'd be like that scene in Scanners where the guy's head just sort of
explodes ultimately. Yeah, it is a little obnoxious and over the top words we've already used in this podcast, but it is real. Anybody that has witnessed it, our wives can attest to it. It's obnoxious.
It is. But whenever I'm around you, you're so smart. I feel like Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder. Remember?
No, you were. I do. Yeah, you were no Simple Jack.
You make my eyes rain. But we could do this all night, folks. But alas, it's time to go. I want to thank you, John, from the bottom of my heart for the time you've given everybody here. I want to thank you even more so for being a leader in our profession, for never backing down and being afraid of some of the things that have been leveled at you, because you're at the adoption forefront of technology and you're an outside-the-box thinker. And I thank my lucky stars every day that I practice, that I was sent your way before I became an orthodontist, because you really set a bar about how you can do amazing orthodontics and have fun while doing it. So looking forward to seeing.
Those are kind words.
It comes from the heart, 100% true. And I sincerely hope that anybody here listening has the opportunity to meet you at some point and really have a real meaningful conversation and really understand what makes you tick, because it's infectious. So anyway, I want to thank you again. I want to thank everybody here for listening. And if you have any questions, always hit me up. I'm always here to help you in any way I can. Thanks for being a part of the Orthopreneurs world. And until we meet again, just wishing you a wonderful, wonderful day. And I hope everything you've ever hoped for in your practice comes true. Thank you, and have a great evening.